Zoom. Here we go. All right, welcome, friends. I'm sure you've all been hearing about seller buy down strategy. Have you guys been kind of made aware of? Oh, we got one more person waiting here. Have you guys been made aware of this as a strategy for buyers and for sellers? Just testing the level of knowledge that you guys have right now on this. The idea is that you can, when you're selling real estate, you're negotiating real estate, you can lower, there's a couple of different dials you have access to when you're negotiating. Purchase price, you can lower the price, or you can get a seller credit from the seller to the buyer, or some combination of those two. And what we're seeing in this rising rate environment is an increase in the power of what the seller credit does for the buyer's affordability. And I've got some slides I'm going to present here. So give me a second to turn this on. Hang on, escape out of the, I'm going to share my screen again. And then now I'm going to go like this. All right, can you guys see that? Did I do this right? Look at this guy. This is what it feels like to be a buyer, right? He's so upset. Just this rate is so high. But we're seeing a lot of contract cancellations. I've got some data on that right now. But I want to start this by, let's think about who we can help. Let's find someone to help with this idea, because I actually think, the seller buy down strategy, this has been part of home buying for years. I've been doing this for almost 20 years. And there's always, a seller credit to pay points so you can get a better deal on your mortgage. That's always been a good strategy for buyers. But right now, with the rates and the expectation of buyers is shifting so rapidly, the market has never been more volatile than this. I think there's two problems for buyers. One is that rates are high, which puts a lot of pressure on their payments, but also rates are so volatile. So they just don't, it's hard to keep up with the ups and the downs. It can change week to week in a way that's profound to someone's budget, right? If they're like, hey, I want a $3,000 mortgage payment, that might mean they're borrowing $490,000 one week. And then the next week, that means they're borrowing, $425,000 because the rate spikes. And so that's totally changes the type of property that they can access for that budget. And that's changing so quickly. And it's causing a lot of turbulence for buyers and for sellers, because buyers are showing up and then they're maybe not quite getting what they had hoped, or maybe don't qualify, these kinds of things, right? So I want you to, in the back of your mind, think about people this year, since, in this buying season, starting around February, who ended up not buying a home because they just couldn't keep up with the run up in pricing because of inventory and there's not enough homes for sale, and who ended up kind of hitting pause because they just felt like it was too scary to be a buyer in this volatile interest rate environment. And which buyers are you currently working with that are writing offers and they're not getting accepted? I think that's probably not as big of a problem right now. Seems like the market is starting, the buyers and sellers are starting to find each other again here more. But there are still people, maybe you've got some buyers that are lowballing, or saying, look, I love this house. It's been on the market for 3 weeks at $650. Let's offer $550 and see what happens. Like someone like that. Like, this is a great conversation to have with that type of buyer. And which homeowners have you talked to in the last year that expressed interest in moving? Like they had a house to sell and then they wanted to change houses. And then they just said, look, we just it's too scary to do a move in this environment. And also, of the listings you've got that are maybe getting some showings or not enough showings, and you need to talk about a price drop, this is a great tool to have to talk about ways to mitigate major price drops, or ways to mitigate if you do have one offer, like you listed at $699 and you got one offer at $650, and you know that's probably where the market is, but this is a way to kind of split the difference by using this strategy, right? Cancellations are skyrocketing. Obviously, there's buyers are trying to lowball. Sellers are wasting a lot of money in price reductions. And so we call this not just a seller buy down strategy, but I love this. On the listing side, do you have a price reduction mitigation strategy? Those are great words to use for your clients, right? And what are we seeing right now when it comes to price reductions and contract cancellations? Are you guys seeing this starting to become really a part of the conversation, part of the day-to-day? Feel free to chime in the chat or whatever. We're seeing a ton of price drops. They're falling at the fastest clip since 2020. So in 2020, we had that major moment when COVID and the lockdown happened, and that spring, and the bond market, the mortgage bond market actually collapsed. And not many people realize that, because the government bailed it out so rapidly and so forcefully that it's not really talked about. But there was a 10-day period where I just thought that the mortgage, the whole Fannie Mae bond market collapsed. No one bought a mortgage bond for 10 days. It was just in a free fall. And then the government came in and bid it up, and that created all kinds of confusion in the market, and people didn't know how long this would last or what was happening. And so I think you saw some price drops then. And then obviously the market snapped back. And then in the last summer of 21, that was just at the peak of, overbidding and low rates. But now look at this angle on this, right? The monthly pending home sales that fell out of contract, it's 14%. This is from Redfin. And then price drops, look at the angle on that one, right? 4-week rolling average. You can see seasonally, there are always these like moments of price drop. 2018, we had rates. It was a rising rate environment for most of that year, 2018 to 2019, to the beginning of 2019, before rates kind of started coming down again. And I think you probably saw some price drops during that episode, but look at this. This is so much. Oh yeah, Alyssa, higher than 14%. So how's that? Backup buyers. So those don't look like they came back on the market. Oh, you think 14% is actually a low number? That might be true.
Yeah. No, I think it is, just based on who I'm talking to, and in my own experience, is that sometimes if there's somebody else that comes in while it's pending, like it never looks like it came back on the market, but it did. It just never had that status change, but it's a different buyer.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's considered a deal fall through as well. But yeah, the market is still strong. So there are enough buyers to catch those fallouts, but it's creating a lot of stress for sellers. And so this is saying, why do you think price drops and cancellations are happening nationwide? And we think that the answer is because of financing, right? The mortgage payment's up 45% year over year. To me, that seems low. When you imagine interest rates going from 3% to 6%, in my mind, that's a 100% increase in interest cost. But when you apply that rate to the average loan amount, which is also increasing, you can see in 2020, this is the trajectory of people's mortgage payments based on how much they're borrowing and what the rate they're getting. And then it picks up again here in 2021, and you can see that it starts to go up as prices go up, but rates are coming down too. So that kind of offsets that increase in price. And then it picks up again this year in 2022, and prices are going up and now rates are going up. So it just goes on a whole other, and this is this is applying a rate of 5.7 through June. In August, we saw rates come down for a hot minute, and then now that's all been obliterated. We're back to some of the highs of the year just as of this week. We will see. So this is an unprecedented surge. If you look at it over the last 7 years, I mean, this is really what's extinguishing that buyer energy, right? And so are we saying, is this a pricing problem? I mean, there's still an inventory shortage, and the houses are worth what they're worth, right? And stuff's taking longer to sell. Doesn't necessarily mean it's overpriced. It just means the market's changing a little bit. Is this a pricing problem, or is this an affordability problem, right? So we think that the seller paid rate buy down can be a very powerful tool for a buyer to pay market price for a house and then still have an affordability plan on that payment to take. There is, right, because right now I think there is money available from sellers to negotiate, right, to buy a different mortgage strategy. And there's two ways to do a buy down. There's the permanent interest rate buy down, which is the common, hey, let's just pay the lender one-time fees in points to buy a below market interest rate, and that's permanent. That rate is for 30 years. You've put in, and sometimes with these loan amounts, and to get a significant buy down, we're talking about a $25,000 load of points, like a $650,000 loan. You're paying potentially 3 points to get a significant payment shift. I mean, that costs close to 20 grand just in lender fees. And that will give you a benefit, and that benefit will be lasting. That's the permanent rate buy down. And there's another thing that you may have heard of as well. Sometimes it's called a 2-1 buy down or a 3-2-1 buy down, that I'm going to get to that a little bit later. That's the second type of buy down, and that's called a temporary buy down. And that's something that's been around for years. I think I did my first 2-1 buy down in like 2005 for someone, first time buyer. It used to be kind of an FHA thing where you could like step down the rate. Like in 2005, a 30-year fix was probably 6%. And so someone could start at 4% for a year and then 5% for year 2. And then you kind of step your way back up to the actual note rate, taking that lender credit. But now we're deploying that in the conventional Fannie Mae type loan space. And I think, to me, the temporary buy down is probably the smartest way to buy real estate right now. And I'll get to that in a minute. But let's start with the idea of just look at the numbers on a permanent interest rate buy down, right? Here's an example of a $675,000 purchase with like 10% down plus fees and taxes. You pay the nominal interest rate of 5.49. I think this slide was made a few weeks ago. It's higher than that now, but the strategy is the same. And your payment's about $3,800, cash to close $73,000. If this buyer was like, I'm going to go $25,000 price reduction, that means they're borrowing less because they're buying it for less. They're only borrowing 90% of the purchase price. They get the same market rate, the same cost of finance and everything. And then because they're borrowing less, they are saving $130 a month. But if you countered that with a $2,500 credit, or excuse me, a 50% of the buy down as a credit, as a counter offer, and suggested, hey, what if we apply this to your mortgage and push the rate from 5.4 to 4.8 in this instance, and still pay $675, instead of saving $130,000 a month, that buyer will save $300 a month in this example. And this is the key in order to sell that to that buyer, to show them this is the equivalent of a $59,000 price reduction for you financially. And so that's why it's better for the buyer and it's better for the seller to do the math on that. And if you extrapolate this into the next 5 years, the amount you save on interest net of the cost is, I mean, they say that the buyer comes out way ahead financially for so this is the net savings over the first 60 months of these 3 different options. So even if they got the $59,000 price reduction, they still don't save as much money because they're paying more interest. Anyway, so this is, this tool we have here called Mortgage Coach that makes these reports for people, really gives a lot of clarity into exactly the cost and benefit analysis. Any questions so far? You guys are probably tracking along with this. So that's the permanent rate buy down. Now I'm going to get into what we call the temporary buy down. And that's taking the seller credit, and instead of paying points, what you can do is take that money and attach it to the mortgage as like an escrow account. And it subsidizes that mortgage payment for the first 24 months. That's the 2-1 buy down, so a 2-year subsidy, or the 3-2-1 buy down, where you take enough to subsidize the payment for 3 years. And the way it works is you start with whatever rate you're locking. On the 2-1 buy down, you start with start rate -2. So the first 12 payments are based on a 4.125 rate. And you need a $13,000 credit to accomplish this. And then the second year, you're at 5.125, and then year 3 and beyond, you're at 6.125. That saves you $702 a month for the first year. So you're kind of building a bridge of affordability with this strategy. And if you take that money you're saving, which is much more significant, that creates opportunities to, and if you do the 3-2-1, where you start at a rate -3 for the first year, you start at saving $965 a month. And then year 2, you saving $702 a month, and so on and so forth. This gives you an opportunity to buy this house, take the savings, maybe like pay off a car in the next 10 months or something like that, to drop that payment. And then, you can kind of debt snowball your way into working your way up to that top rate being more manageable for you in the years to come. Or I think there is a very good chance that we're going to have an opportunity to refinance before you get all the way to the top level rate. And here's the thing: whatever money you've negotiated from the seller that goes into that subsidy account, if you refinance or sell before you've spent all that money, it just gets applied to your principal. So the buyer is guaranteed to take every single one of those dollars and bank it for themselves. I like to think of it this way: if we do a temporary buy down and we can negotiate a $25,000 credit, that's this example here. So what I did was, for this purchase price of $635, took a $13,000 credit and applied it to a temporary buy down for the first 24 payments. And if we wanted to do for the first 36 payments, it actually doubles the cost. So adding 12 costs $25,000 to accomplish that. Now, the seller has to pay every penny of the buy down. There's no way to get part of it covered. You have to get 100% of it covered. So if you can't, maybe you can only negotiate a $10,000 credit from the seller, but it costs 13, we would have to add the difference to the purchase price and then call it 13, if that makes sense. So the seller will still net out what they need to net out. And so in this example, I added the difference to the purchase price. So if we know we can get 13, but we really want 25, I'm adding 12 to the principal of this. So now we're buying it for 647 instead of 635. We're borrowing a little bit more, but we're starting at an even lower rate for even longer. So I just wanted to make sure you understood structurally how this is mapping out. And you can save $965 a month for 12 payments, but it's important to have a plan. What we don't want to have them do is kind of focus on that savings and then kind of like get themselves to a place where they kind of can't afford it or don't want to afford it. But I think that if rates do what most people think they're going to do, we will be in a position to refinance people into a much more stable, lower interest rate. Fannie Mae thinks that in the next year, Fannie Mae's prediction is that interest rates in Q2, Q3 of next year is going to be more in the mid to low fours. So if we could refi to 4.5 and 2023, that $25,000 credit helped you pay this payment for the first year. And then if there's $12,000 left over, that credit actually goes to effectively pay for the refinance. So the seller is now paying your payment for a couple of years, and then whatever's left over goes towards your inevitable refinance. That's kind of how I'm imagining it. And that's why I think the temporary buy down is a smarter way to go. Now, it is possible that rates just keep going up and then they just never come down and there is no refinance to be had, right? At which point the permanent buy down, you'll reflect back and say, I should have just bought a permanently lower rate. And we will have that discussion, but I think it is a good, it's a good bet that you'll be able to refinance at some point in the next, few years. And so you can see that over time, interest paid in the next 15 years, if you don't refi out of it, all you save is the amount that you got credited because you're in the exact same loan, but minus that subsidy contribution. But if you do refi, this is, what you're able to like really just chop down the interest. I mean, it's a profound difference between the note rate of 6.125 over 15 years, 469 to 327. So it's over $100,000 saved over 15 years if that refi bears out. So this only applies, the temporary strategy only applies to FHA, VA, and conventional loans. If someone's getting a jumbo loan, you have to do a permanent. You have to just pay points and do the permanent buy down. There is no temporary buy down per se available. But here's an example of the seller buy down on the jumbo loan. Obviously, in these larger loan amounts, the effect is even more powerful, right? So a $37,000 interest, buy down credit achieves a price reduction of $135,000 to go from 5.5 to 4.375 with a, so I have a, and yeah, so the same, you can see how much saving, the price reduction, what they thought they wanted and what they actually achieve is just far more financially profound for that family. So that's a huge, huge interest savings. And that's the story I really wanted to share with you. We've developed a simple tool that looks like this. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm going to email you guys all a copy of this. And if you ever are on a listing and you're trying to kind of bridge that gap and you're like, oh gosh, we want to counter them with less than what they're trying to, chop down. This is your sales price mitigation tool. All you got to do is email me and just say like, here's the price we listed at, here's the offer that was given, but we want to counter with X. And what I'll do is I'll just plug in, well, here's an example of what X would accomplish for this buyer, and what this does is shows you, it shows you exactly how much you save. This is a $50,000 price reduction replaced with a $24,000 seller credit. right? To go from 5.875 to 4.5. Actually just made this yesterday. This is based on yesterday's pricing. So it saves them an extra, what, $380 a month. And that seller, which was in this example, netting 565, the offer had them taking a $50,000 haircut, and here with your counter to the counter, puts another 30, what is that? I don't know. The difference, it puts $26,000 back on their side of the ledger. And for the buyer, you can show them like, hey, this is like money for you. You'd have to get $129,000 price reduction to achieve this kind of savings. So let's make a deal, right? So that's the tool I'm going to be emailing to you guys. Does that seem like something that would be helpful just to have? And you can also do it on the buy side too. If your buyer is like, I don't want to pay more for this, you can say, well, what if we kind of rejiggered this and put you in a, so it really does help bridge that gap of the expectations of the seller and the real affordability problems of the buyer. So there you go. That's my show. Let me see. I've got something in the chat here. Yeah. How do you calculate? Alyssa says, how do you calculate the cost of the buy down? It's a percentage of the purchase price. Actually, the buy down is a percentage of the mortgage. So the amount they're buying or borrowing is how that buy down is covered. And this also brings me to one other thing that's super important to keep in mind when you're trying to accommodate this type of strategy. The seller can only contribute to the max that the lender will allow. And that is a function of the loan program, and it's also a function of their down payment. So this works with someone if someone's doing let's say they're buying a $525,000 house with 3% down. The biggest credit that Fannie Mae will allow on a 3 or 5% down purchase is 3% of the purchase price. So if you're buying, for easy math, a $500,000 house with 3% down, the most seller credit that's allowed is 3% of 500, $15,000. So in that example, you could do a permanent buy down with $15,000, pay points, push the rate down, or you could do a temporary buy down, but probably only a two-year buy down, because that's around $13,000 to $15,000 would be the cost of that. You couldn't do the 3-year buy down if you had 3 or 5% down, most likely. I have a spreadsheet as well that calculates exactly how much credit is needed to create that subsidy account. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but this is definitely something that I'm talking to all my clients about right now. Is here's how you can achieve an affordable a plan to have a payment, that works for you and still get the house that you need. You can see the weight come off their shoulders when you kind of start saying, look, you can have this 3.125 payment for a year, and then we'll try to build a bridge to get you into a more sustainable plan between now and then. And like that money is yours. What it's going to go to, if you get $25,000, we refi in 6 months, and the refi costs $10,000, and you still have 20 grand, so you get the free refi and then $10,000, principal reduction. So it just goes straight to your home's equity. Anyway, so people are getting a lot of relief and sort of power from that. So it's 3% max if you have 3 or 5% down. If you have 10% down to 20 or 25% down, Fannie Mae allows a 6% credit. And if you have, I think, more than 25% down, they allow a 9% credit of the purchase price. So that's like massive. And FHA allows a 6% credit, just always. VA allows a 4% credit always. If you're buying it as a rental property, if it's non-owner, you can do this, but the max allowed is 2% of the purchase price. So it's not as profound if you're doing it as a rental. Can a buyer put less down and instead contribute like out of their own pocket? So this has to be 100% funded by the seller. So they can't, yeah.
That's my question. Like, I mean, because is there, instead if I have a client who was going to put 30% down, but instead wanted to put 15% down so they could create this account. I mean,
they'd have to just sort of do that on their own. They'd have to just put money in savings and then like dispense it to themselves, but it's the lender will set this up for them if it's funded by the seller.
Okay.
But it seems like the buyer at that point, like I've been telling my buyers again, who have 20% down, put 15% down, take that extra 5% and buy your rate down.
Yeah, I think that's a great plan. The only downside to that, or potential downside to that strategy, is even if they can get, if they put a heroic amount of cash into their mortgage and get a rate of, let's say, 4.875 or something, and then rates drop to 4.25 in the future, and they end up refinancing in a couple of years, that money's gone. You know what I mean? That's the only thing in my heart that I'm a little bit nervous about, is the financial efficiency of doing that. But I think what it does is it creates a lot of certainty for the buyers. And so I think that is really valuable.
And for a lot of buyers, it feels like most of my buyers, that is more important than the chance that the rate may drop a 0.5 percentage point, below what they buy it down to. It's the certainty that they're not gonna have that, the rate go up after 2 or 3 years or anything like that. And so,
Exactly.
Yeah, at this point, anything under 5 sounds fantastic. And then in like 3 or 4 years, which probably won't happen, but then if the rate drops 1% or more, after it's been a few years, then it makes sense to possibly refi at that point.
Totally. And refinances aren't always about payment reduction.
Yeah.
A lot of times people refinance because to access cash, restructure debt, and sometimes and it's not always about lowering the rate. So, but when rates go down, it's sort of like becomes a compelling thing to look at, right? So it's just sort of, that's one, everybody can benefit from that when rates drop. But yeah, let me see, make sure I got all the questions answered here. Helpful, how simple it could be sending an email to calculate for the counter. Yeah, I'd be happy to be involved in helping create a mathematical conversation for you guys when you're in the field trying to put deals together. So yeah, I've always been excited about structuring the loan to the benefit of my clients. I always think that's one of the ways that I can really provide a lot of value to my clients, is really kind of helping manage that for them. And then it was just a temporary buy down. I learned about it 2 weeks ago. I mean, I've always known about it, but I didn't realize that subsidy account gets applied to principal. And when I kind of recognized that, I was just like, oh, wow, this changes everything. So I think that's just an important feature to emphasize. So that's anyway, that's the key thing on that second way to do a buy down, because not every realtor, but most realtors have an intuition about, oh, you can buy the rate down and that's good for the buyers, but they don't realize how powerful it can be for buyers on the listing side, and really just say, hey, look, this is like $100,000 price drop, even though it's only 20 grand or whatever. So I think that's because rates have gone up, points are pushing rates down further than they used to. A year ago, if you paid, it just, no one paid 20 grand to lower the rate. It just didn't, it wasn't even available. But now it is. And as rates go up, we're going to start to see a lot more of these products become more common. You're going to start to see, I haven't seen adjustable rates in the conforming loan space. I see them definitely in the non-conforming jumbo loans. There's adjustable rates have a good savings effect. But conforming, I remember the last time rates were this high was probably like 2006. And there was a ton of 5-year ARMs. I mean, a lot of people were almost, and in 2006, I was 32 years old. I had just bought my first house only a couple of years before. I was pretty new to the industry. And a lot of my friends were buying their first houses, and like nobody got a 30-year fix. We all did interest only, 30-year fix, but the first 10 years interest only was a real popular thing. And that was that would be like 6.5. Or if the interest rate was 6.25, a 5-year ARM would be like 5, right? And people would just take the 5-year ARM at 5 and just, I'll deal with it later. You know, that was a real common approach in my, you know, personal network of home buyers at that time. But I'm not seeing that product available right now. It's just the Fannie Mae is not really offering it. That might change, but right now it's just, I haven't seen it. I hope it changes, because I think that interest only strategy is a good one as well. Anyway, we'll see what develops, but I'm sure the market always finds a way to grease the gears of commerce, right? Well, I appreciate your time, you guys. Does anybody have anything they want to add or any stories to share? Otherwise, I'll just make sure that I give you guys that follow-up email with that spreadsheet for your own device. And appreciate you guys coming in and saying hi and spending some time with me.
Thanks, James.
Thank you, Erica. I owe you a phone call too. We should talk.
Sounds good.
It is very helpful. Thank y'all.